Welcome to Running for Real, a global community with a shared love and curiosity for running. Together we reconnect with the reasons why we love to run and discover ways it helps us become better people. Whether it's the quiet moments of a morning run while the rest of the world still sleeps, or befriending the strangers next to you at the start line of a race. We are here to connect with others who see running as the common thread that weaves our lives together. Come join me, Tina Muir, as I talk with people from all walks of life, united by a love of running. Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 310 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm excited that you are here, and I am excited for you to meet my guest today. My guest today was my college teammate over at Ferris State. She is a radio host on 105.3 Hot FM. She is an intersex advocate, and she was Mrs. America 2022. And I've really loved following her travels as she's gone through that. And most importantly, or can we say that here? No, definitely not most importantly. Most importantly is that she's a wonderful human, but she's also a runner. And we talk a lot about running, how it intersects with things, how it comes into every element of our lives, and how it makes us a better person, but also sometimes can be harmful. So I am very excited for you to go meet my friend, Jackie Green, on the podcast today. Let's go. Thank you to Athletic Greens for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. Now, we know it's summer. Well, for most of us. Some of us it's probably winter. For most of us, it is summer. It is the time to be traveling. It is the time to be going to explore, whether it's near home or whether it's further from home. You are likely not in your usual routine, and that means it can be difficult to get the foods that we need to get into our bodies. I know that I am particularly guilty of this time of year, just grabbing for the easiest thing to go find, and I'm not maybe paying attention to what fruits and vegetables are going in my body as I should be. That said, I wake up every morning, and the first thing I do, I've mentioned this so many times, the first thing I do is take my Athletic Greens, even if there is only a 20-minute window from when I wake up, which I currently am at 5 a.m, and get out the door for my run at 5:20. I still manage to take my Athletic Greens down. It's a little bit of calories, also gets me started for the day. It promotes my gut health, supports immunity, it boosts energy, helps with recovery. All those things gives me this kickstart. It's like an insurance policy, so that no matter what I do, no matter what I eat throughout the rest of the day, I have had that one serving of AG1, which delivered that high impact blend of 9 health products, which is a multivitamin, minerals, probiotics, adaptogens, and more. It's going to take care of your body, and it's going to allow you to just get on with your day. No matter what happens with your diet that day, you have some stuff in it. Now, you probably know that people like Tim Ferriss, Robin Arzon, Lewis Hamilton, Michael Gervais. There's many more people who love Athletic Greens, and once you give it a try, you will absolutely see what I and so many others are talking about. It is gluten-free, there's no eggs in it, no sugar added, it's nut-free, dairy-free, so no matter what your diet is, you will make it work for you. When you sign up, we're going to athleticgreens.com/Tina. You can get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 plus some travel packs. Those travel packs are things you can go use as you are exploring the world, especially this year as we are finally able to maybe get away from home a little bit more. So go to athleticgreens.com/Tina to go check it out. Jackie, this is the most surreal thing. Welcome to the Running for Real podcast. I am excited you are here, my friend.
I am so excited that you asked me to come on here. I've been listening to you since you started this, and I feel like I've known you forever.
Well, you kind of have at this point. It's been
Right?
a long time. I have a very serious question for you to start.
Okay.
Did you bring us some brambleberries to eat?
You know, I Googled brambleberries. I just don't know where to get them.
So for the listeners, Jackie and another teammate, I should backtrack. Jackie was my college teammate. I would have mentioned this in the intro, but Jackie was my college teammate at Ferris State. Her and another person on the team, Mackenzie, used to always tease me. I don't even know how it started about brambleberries being something British.
I don't know either because I don't know anything about England or British culture or the food.
So you came up with brambleberries. So I just had to, lighten up, make it nice and relaxed before we began by asking you about brambleberries, because that is something whenever I see that word, because that is a thing, brambleberries is a term for like berries, like raspberries and blackberries and all those berries. Yeah.
I thought we were making it up and just using a British accent that wasn't very good.
Nope. There you go.
I always think of Percy pigs, though, because that was a treat you brought back on break once from your hometown.
Yeah. Oh yeah, English listeners will definitely know that. So those are still going, and you wouldn't believe how they've marketed those now. There's about 15 different types. You can get Percy Pig birthday cakes and towels and t-shirts, and they just turned it into
try all the new Percy pigs.
You don't. They're literally exactly the same. They're just different colors. But anyway, I don't want to spend the whole time marketing Percy pigs. I mentioned we are college teammates, and I wanted to begin with something a bit weird, and it's going to make me sound a bit narcissistic, but because people listening to this have listened to this for a long time, most of them, I would imagine. When I arrived at Ferris, I have Tim, who you would remember as the athletic trainer, always says to me that he remembers me walking around the corner and remembers thinking to himself, hey, who brought back the 80s? Because I was wearing, apparently I was wearing this like stripy shirt, colorful shirt, and these like, not cargo pants, but something similar with loads of pockets. And he remembers that distinctively. So I have to ask you a similar question. What was your opinion when I first turned up on campus? Because you were in your third year at that point.
Yeah, I was in my third year. I remember just being really shocked that you'd want to come to Big Rapids, Michigan.
True point.
That was more I was like, she's so fast and she's from a different country and she wants to come here.
Yeah, well, at the beginning, I maybe didn't know what I was in for. Let's put it that way with the weathers.
It had to have been a culture shock.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially as, I don't know if you remember this, but I came from California. I was in California before that.
Yeah. And I remember too, looking back, it's always different. I was 20 years old when you started. So my frame of reference was a lot different. I just knew what I saw on television. And I thought, wow, why is this girl coming to run here? But see, now I can appreciate it for what it is. It's a really brave move to leave your home country and fly out to Michigan and be like, I guess I'm going to go run cross country somewhere different.
Do you know, I was just talking about this the other day, how crazy it was that I didn't have one of my parents come with me. And I just said bye to them at the airport and then took off.
It's wild. My parents had to drive me up there. It's only a 2-hour drive and they had to walk me into my dorm and I'm like, bye, mommy.
I know. I was thinking back about that the other day and I was like, I've thought before about how easily that could have gone wrong. But then I was thinking, I mean, why didn't my dad come with me? I don't get it. So I don't know what we were thinking. I don't know if I'm just looking at this with a 2022 lens, and you probably wouldn't do that now. But
right
back then, I guess it was okay.
I don't know. I feel like you're pretty independent, and you're obviously very adaptable. I would have, at 37 now, I could go do that and be on my own, but not at 20. I would never have survived.
That is true. So we were on the team together. We had 2 years. Was it 2 years? 1.5. Yeah, on the team together at this, and we all went through many changes, grew up a lot during that time. And I would love, as I haven't gone over this much, I've had people on in the past who have run track and cross country in college, but it's usually people who have then gone on to be world level athletes and have had an experience where they are just going to these Division 1 schools where they get to go all over and all that stuff. So I'd love for you to share with your thoughts on what it is like as a track and field cross country athlete, as someone who was, you were higher up in the field and in the rankings of things in terms of college runners, but you obviously knew at the time you weren't going to make an Olympic team. So what was your experience there?
For me, I cared more about being my own personal best and like hitting PRs. It felt, I guess, especially being at the level I was at, still like very much like high school was for me. I went to a really big high school, a really big Division 1. So there were a lot of talented athletes there. And I felt like when I transitioned to college, it was just like the training was harder, but everything else felt kind of the same. We traveled within the Midwest. It didn't feel a whole lot different other than, I was on my own instead of having my mom and dad there. In terms of the pressure I'd put on myself, it would come in waves, and it really just depended on the season and depended on where I was at emotionally and mentally.
I think that's with all of us, though, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and actually that is one thing I remember about you is, as you said, in waves, but when you put pressure on yourself, you put so much pressure on yourself. And
it would, and I'm sure we'll bring this up later, but I guess touching on it, I was born with an intersex condition, which is something that just like now in mainstream media, we talk about a lot more. But back then, in what was it, like 2007, 2006, it wasn't something we talked about at all. And it's not something I had heard of from other people, other than when it was sensationalized on Olympic athletes like Caster Semenya. And my condition was kind of the opposite of what you hear about a lot of times in media, where I was born with a lack of testosterone. My body can't produce any, and it can't react to any. So instead, it converts any testosterone into usable estrogen. But at the time, being something kind of rare, I was told by a lot of doctors in private with my family members that were not speaking to the school on my behalf. They were only talking to me, that it needed to be kept very, very quiet because the school might not be comfortable with me competing. And I wasn't by any means, and I'm not naive to this, one of the best runners on the team. I worked hard to be top 5, and I really cared about the sport. But I still in the back of my head had that, what if they take all this away and I don't get to be on the team because of this condition I don't even understand myself? So I think a lot of the pressure I'd put on myself would come from some of that. Like I'd go home in the summer or on Christmas break, and my mom would drive me to my specialist who was in Ann Arbor at the time. And I'd go in all alone, and they'd tell me these scary things. And I'd come back and I would be like, oh God. And I'd get in my own head, and I would let my emotions get the best of me. And instead of telling anyone, because I was really scared to tell people the whole broad spectrum of what was going on, I kind of just had a lot of mood swings and emotional backlash. And I think that would sometimes come out in pressure on myself, a lot of body image issues, and you know how young girls can get.
That makes my heart hurt thinking about you going through that alone. And it also makes me wonder, it's another good reminder of how everyone has something they're dealing with, and you never know what is going on. Like if there was, I knew you put a lot of pressure on yourself in races, but if there was one thing I wouldn't have really said, I would never have guessed you were struggling with something like that. Or not even, in terms of exactly what it was, but right. Just in terms of something big that was kind of eating away at you. But did you tell anyone at school or not? Like,
no,
literally not.
I would tell people I knew I couldn't have children, and I would tell people I couldn't have a period, which was part of my condition. And I kind of had to, because they'd take us to the training room and they'd ask me, when was the date of your last period? I mean, I'd never had a period. So, that would come up. Then they'd always ask me why. And then I'd make up kind of outlandish stories, I guess, about why I cysts on my ovaries, but I wasn't born with ovaries. So sometimes those kind of lies get away from you, and then they eat at you like, I'm going to get caught lying, and then I'm going to look real stupid. And so I kind of battled between two things I really wanted in life. One was being respected as a young woman and having a boyfriend and having friends and having so being accepted socially. And so I'd run around with these people I'd meet at work or in college and go to parties and want just people to really think of me as a feminine, girl. But then the other part of me that loved cross country and running and wanted to be good at it. And I feel like sometimes those two wants collided in negative ways.
Yeah, definitely. Well, especially because one thing I noticed in you from the time I first came along to by the time I left was how invested you were in your running throughout that time. It grew and grew and grew. You really committed. But with that commitment comes, letting go of, towards the end of a race, letting go of what image you have, because you can't unless you're Eliud Kipchoge, you can't maintain composure without sacrificing some of your performance.
Yeah. And it's hard, as we age, accepting like our limitations and where we are in each season of our lives. Like, I've had ups and downs where I find myself like, oh my gosh, I'm almost back to as fast as I was when I was 22. And I'm like, that's really surprising. How did I do that? But then just as fast as it comes on, it's like, wow, I'm really out of shape and I'm a mom and I'm really struggling. So sometimes running it can have its negative tones mentally for me. Like I know sometimes I have to step away from it and be like, let's find a different kind of fitness for a while because I'm allowing this to not be a fun thing. I'm just competing with myself and getting angry.
I know that will.
Sure.
So then what did running mean to you back then in college? Like, was it an escape? Was it something that, you tell me.
That's a really good question that I haven't pondered a whole lot. It just was always something I've done that was meaningful to me. It's always something I really liked. I had done it from when I was a young age. And when I was like, I want to say I was in like 5th grade when I kind of discovered I'm okay at running. I did like a mile race and did okay. And I thought maybe this will be a sport I can do because I had never done a sport. So after that, I made my friends that way and my team felt like my family. And it was something I never wanted to have to let go of. Like even going from high school into college, I wasn't the fastest runner on my team by any stretch. I was top 5 maybe. And I wanted to keep running in college. And I remember everyone said, why? You're not running 17-minute 5Ks. Why do you want to keep doing this? I'm like, why? I just couldn't imagine a life without it was really what it came down to.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that's changed now? You mentioned you can have periods away from it. So yes, your relationship's changed?
I would say I can have periods away from racing. I can't really have periods away from the act of running. Like I still, when I say I'm not running right now, I'm still running like 20 miles a week.
Okay. Yeah. Which is a solid amount.
Right. And that's something that I need to, like, I'm sure that you deal with. Appreciating that 20 miles a week is still a solid amount because I know for me, I'll be like, if it's not 50 miles a week, what am I doing?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing. I'm very much in that stage right now. I just took a week off just because I felt like I needed it. And coming back into it, I have that little thought in my head that's like, what if I strength trained 4 days a week and then only ran 3? What would that be like? But then there's that part of me that's like, yeah, but then you'd end up so unfit that if you decided you wanted to do a race, you'd be starting from scratch. And it's like I almost get to the point where I'm like, could I like outweigh and not do it? But then I can't quite take the step to do it because it is so ingrained. And like you said, you even if it's not what it was before, it still is something and it still is important.
Do you find yourself struggling when you do a race, and I'm sure you do to an extent, finding joy in it, knowing I'm not going to get a personal record? I'm not going to.
I really don't struggle with that anymore. In fact, actually, Steve and I were talking a few months ago about how when I ran, like me running New York and running 3:17, which did you run that time? No, it was someone else I was talking to who were like, that's the exact time I ran. Me running 3:17 at New York, I think was actually more valuable than had I run a 2:30 something because of just the relatability to everyone else to say that your life doesn't have to revolve around running and you can still enjoy it. And so for me, no, I really don't struggle with that. I think it would be harder for me if I was in like, close to my personal best shape, which is where I think it's tough because you're kind of almost there, but I'm so far away from it that I think
you've let it kind of, you get, because that your personal best was such an elite level. That's something that's really hard to maintain for long periods of time.
Yeah. Well, and I know the work that would go into it to get there. And I just think, no.
I
like the same to you. Would you want to go into you would maybe want to run as fast as you had, but you're like, oh, that's like 3 steps too far. I'm just, no.
It's like, so I took a break from marathons after Boston 2016. I ran like a 3:20 and it was a good race, but then we had a surrogate my sister that carried our daughter for us. And she actually was born just a month and a half after Boston that year, 2016. And marathons were off the table for a while. I just couldn't do the staying up all night with the baby and then trying to run long runs. So I took a break. And in 2019, I decided I'm going to train again. I'm going to PR. I'm going to do this marathon here in Detroit area in Michigan. I'm so excited. And I trained really, really hard. And I did PR like by like a minute, which I know is still really good. But when you train and train and work, you're like, oh my gosh, 1 minute. I was hoping for more. So I think like you said about New York, when I went to New York, I knew you're not going to go run a 3:16. That's not in the cards today. But I ran a 3:27, felt good doing it. And it was the most fun race I've ever ran. The amount of people cheering and the view, it was a really cool experience.
Legacy of Speed follows the transformation of a San Jose State track program in the 1960s. What started out as a second-tier state college no one outside of California had ever heard of quickly became known as the home to Speed City. The guidance of one coach and his unconventional techniques launched the careers of the fastest sprinters of the day. Host Malcolm Gladwell, a competitive runner himself and former podcast guest on here, traces the journeys of those sprinters who went on to ignite a boycott movement and protest the 1968 Summer Olympics. Malcolm talks to Olympic athletes, sports journalists, performance coaches, and documentarians. And you'll hear from some of the best runners of all time, Tommy Smith, John Carlos, and Lee Evans. It's a story about athletes who dared to take a stand and the mentors who made them fast enough and brave enough to change the world. Find Legacy of Speed wherever you get your podcasts. I find it hard to think about going back into that state where you're just like, eyes rolled back in your head. You're just like tunnel vision. I just don't want to go there.
Nothing feels good about it.
No. And I think we're all I shouldn't say all, but a lot of runners are going to go through a stage where that is really important, and that's great, but it doesn't always have to be that way. And, and that's one of the things I've loved to see about you as you've kind of gone through this journey of running is that, we've talked about, now I know why you put so much pressure on yourself, but you seemed very, almost like you would finish a race and you were looking for validation. Like, was that good enough?
Right.
And I remember that so clearly with you. Like, I just wanted to be like, I love you no matter what, Jackie. Like, it doesn't matter.
You're so kind. Well, and I think we all are different when we're kids in our younger 20s like that. We're so young, and it's like, I don't know. I know my story's a little different, but I think so many of us are looking for validation in all aspects of our lives, whether it's school or our friendships. And, we're still, even in your younger 20s, and I don't know very many female athletes that can say they can't relate to this. You're still comparing yourself to everyone else on your team. And why are they getting better and I'm not? I'm doing the same thing as them. I've worked so hard. But then at the same time, they're your friends and you care about them. So then you feel bad that you feel that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I have mentioned on this podcast a few times before about how college teams is such a dangerous place for girls. I think it's changing in some capacities, but there's so much insecurity flying around, it's like you said, friends, but still not quite able to find that meaningful support in one another as maybe you could get, in your 30s and or beyond. And let's move on then. We'll come back to running in a little bit, but you, I guess I'll start with, I was going to go talk about your role as a radio host, but I think I'm going to go for the absolute opposite and do your Mrs. America pageant, or maybe they are connected in some way and you can tell me why. Winning Mrs. America, was it last year or was it this year? It was 2021.
I'm the 2022 queen. I won at the end of November 2020.
Okay. All right. So you won that and you were, crowned this. You've been traveling all over. You've been doing all these things. I see you supporting other women all the time. And that's another area that in my head, would not be a supportive space, is something like that where you're competing against other women, particularly in, the aesthetic side of it. So
Right.
tell us about your experience there, and how have you surrounded yourself with women who, are supportive?
It was a long road. I started pageants when I was like 12 years old. And from 12 till I left for college, I did pageants. My talent was baton twirling. And that was the other side. I was a runner. And then on the other side of things, I was twirling and doing pageants with my mom every weekend. And I never won, ever. And it was kind of always like, I always really wanted to just win one. And I'd always say that. My mom every year would say, okay, we can't afford to do more than one a year because they cost a lot of money.
Yeah,
but
sure.
we'll do another one. We'll keep doing them until you win. And, you're just going to keep working hard. And, I went to college and I was running, and I thought, well, I guess that part of my life's over. I'm done with pageants. But when I got married, I discovered Mrs. Pageantry, and Mrs. America has been around for, 70 years. It's been around forever. And it's always something that I thought that would be cool to do. But the odds of winning that are very slim, realistically. Every state has a pageant and one person wins that. And then they all go, 51 women compete at Mrs. America. So I competed my first time in Michigan in 2015 before we had our daughter. And I got second place, first runner up. And, I was like, I had made a lot of friends, and I'm actually in a chat group with women I met through doing that pageant. And that was 2015, and we still talk every day in this group. I just made a lot of friends from it. And I've noticed in that community, because it isn't something as concrete as running, where in running, I know what I can do better, right? If I am running and I got a cramp and I kind of die before the finish line and someone passes me, they won. Right? That's fair and square. They crossed the finish line before me. But when you're doing something like a pageant, it's less of there's no rubric in terms of, well, that girl worked harder than me, so she should win, and vice versa, because it's kind of, does their story speak to the judges? Because every woman, has a platform, and mine is about, protecting our intersex youth and children with differences in development, and kind of helping make it more of a safe space in the healthcare field for people who discover they have an intersex trait. And I know for a long time, being so afraid to talk about that, especially as an athlete, and being in a small town in Michigan where we're kind of a conservative community, and change and things that are different aren't always welcomed here, in my opinion. I was a little leery to talk about it. So when I made it my platform and started actually diving in, I found that I was getting more confidence, but I still was a little bit on the scared side. Like, but what's this person going to think if I say it, if I just come out and say it? Like, this is what it is. So when I went to Mrs. Michigan in 2021, I had fully planned on going in and talking about the platform, but I kind of panicked halfway through, and I sugarcoated everything, and I didn't really tell my whole story. And I don't know if you know this, was first runner up. And the girl that won was a really close friend of mine. Her name's Katie, and she's wonderful, wonderful woman. But Katie was diagnosed with Tarlov cysts. They are cysts on your spine and tailbone, and they drip onto the nerves that are in your tailbone. And it's horribly painful. And she ended up having to have a terrible spinal surgery. But that was diagnosed about halfway through between Mrs. Michigan and Mrs. America. And because I was second place, when she said, I can't do this, they called me and they go, hey, as first runner up, it's kind of, you get to go now, because she can't.
Oh, no,
go.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, so I didn't actually win. So when I went to Mrs. America, I kind of went with this, well, this is going to be fun. I get to meet women from all over the country, and I'm going to go stay in this fancy hotel in Vegas and go on this big stage, and I get to pick a whole new wardrobe. And I looked at it more like a fun experience, and I think I was able to be more of my authentic self and share my story, because I had nothing to lose. I didn't even win my way there. I was second place. So I was very grateful and very shocked when I won.
Wow. I did not know that. And that is so cool. And also, I mean, what a good story of, obviously you wouldn't want that to happen to her. And that's, I hope she's okay. But you also, it's weird because it's very, I don't know if you would know this or remember this, but when I ran for Great Britain in the World Championships, it was because I got called up like 4 days before because someone dropped out. Yes. And so I went into it like, I don't care. Like, I'm just going to like do my best. I have no pressure. No one's expecting anything from me. And it was a very similar thing. Like I didn't win, or I didn't finish first on the team, but I finished third on the team. And I was really proud of that. And so there is something to be said about when those, I guess there are moments in life where you get a door is opened, and it's
Yes.
whether you go through it and you make the most of that opportunity, or whether you let that imposter syndrome or whatever it may be take it away from you. And I love that you took that opportunity and just went into it with yourself and won them over by being able to be yourself without having that reservedness.
I think what really helped too was accepting that, and this takes a really long time, and I think anyone can relate to this on some level, accepting that winning or doing better than last time doesn't necessarily mean you didn't do your best. And I think that's what I always struggled with. And that's in terms of running, in terms of pageants, in anything, work, even when we get a ratings book and I work for a morning radio show, same thing. If I'm not better than I was last time, or I'm not achieving some goal, I had cooked it up in my head, I didn't do good. I must not have worked hard enough. And I think having that moment of going to Mrs. America, as everyone knew, well, that girl didn't really win her state. It was really common. And I made a lot of friends that way because I think people were like not very intimidated by me. I didn't win my state.
Until you swooped in right at the end.
Yeah, sniped it. Yeah. But I'm like, I genuinely like making friends, and I always have. And I think as I've gotten older and a little less competitive and a less putting less pressure on myself, I like it even more. And so because of that, I take more time to get to know people and learn their name and get their phone number, and I'm going to text them. And that's how I like to live my life, especially the last few years. And I think it paid off during Mrs. America week because I was able to make so many connections while I was there. And then by the time I got in front of the judges for the interview to share my platform and my passion, I had so many relatable stories to share and connections to make with them. And it just all came together.
Yeah, I love that. I love hearing that. I think that's something that you and I both have in common. We both kind of live a bit of a public life, but we also maybe say too much. Yes. Maybe people can resonate and connect because of that. Like, oh, I probably shouldn't have shared that story about myself because it's embarrassing, but I said it anyway. That kind of rawness.
Do you ever do that and then go back and think, why did I share that? Now I have anxiety all night about why I said that.
Yeah, I mean, more I get it when I've said something about how someone made me feel. Like, I do these together runs. I don't know if you've ever done one or seen one or whatever, but where I take my mic and I'm running and I'm not thinking about what I'm saying. So sometimes I'll be like, this really bothers me or this hurt my feelings. And then people will comment, or maybe that person listens and I'm like, oh my God, I just talked about them on a public platform. But that was my feeling in the moment. So yeah, I think more that's where I sometimes do say stories and I'm like, oh, I probably shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, probably could take that one to myself, but it's too late now.
Exactly. So, but I'm curious with, you said about your background with CAIS, complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, and you had said how within running you was kind of coming up against these pageants or and also what you were doing in your life, like going out and socializing and being feminine and coming up against that. How much of going into pageants do you think was because you were trying to prove to yourself that you were, female enough to win pageants? Was that a part of it?
Yes. I can look back and see now that I'm old enough to understand more of what I was thinking at the time. I bet it was a huge part of it. And I think that was true with a lot of the things I've done and said or did in my life up until the last couple of years, when I could really embrace more of what makes me different and why it's okay. I think in terms of pageants, I liked being on stage and I liked the fashion and I liked doing talent and I just liked that stuff. I just always was drawn to it. I watched the pageants on TV. It was something I wanted to do. But I think I also had something to prove in the back of my head. And with running, I was always afraid of not being accepted or having someone misconstrue like something was wrong with me for having this condition. And I can remember I listened to another I won't say who, famous runner podcast. This would have been years ago. And she was someone I was idolized. Like, she's one of those runners that I just really resonated with. And I thought she was really funny. And I liked how she portrayed body image and self-acceptance. And she was a good runner. And I was training at the time. And I remember she did a podcast on her podcast. I don't think it's around anymore, talking about Caster Semenya, and basically decided to use that platform to talk about why she believed Caster Semenya should be on hormone blockers and how it's not fair. It's just not fair. And went on this big old rant about it. And I remember feeling devastated because I don't have a condition that leaves me needing a hormone blocker because my body doesn't produce testosterone, but I do have XY chromosomes, even though I'm female. And that's a rarity. It's very rare. It's like 1 in 500,000 babies have what I have, but it can happen. Now, Caster Semenya is a good example because she does not have XY chromosomes. She has chromosomes you see in typical females. She just produces too much testosterone. And it made me think, oh my gosh, if someone I respect and look up to has these horrible things to say about a woman, frankly, because she's getting beat by her, that's my opinion. And I know not every runner or an athlete would feel that way, but that's how I feel. Then what would they think of me having these chromosomes that don't match what we think we know about men and women? And I let that one podcast eat at me for years. I think I listened to it when I was like 27 or 28. And then that bothered me so much. I don't know why. It just ate at me like, oh my gosh, all those fears I had about if you learned I had this are real. Because look what happens if I was really good. That's what would happen. And once I got over it, I was married, we had Greenlee, and I realized no one's going to kick me off a college cross country team because I'm not on one. I'm, in my 30s now. This doesn't matter. And I could talk about it. I got an outpouring of support, but on top of that, I've gotten hundreds of messages from mothers who just got their child was diagnosed with something I have or something similar, because there are 40 plus conditions you can be born with that fall under that umbrella that we call intersex or difference in sexual development. And it's been eye-opening that everything you say in terms of that stuff matters, because you don't know who's listening and who's affected by it and how it can change their life.
This episode is brought to you by Running for Real. I can't even get through it without laughing. This episode is Running for Real, but I wanted to tell you about something today. I want to tell you about Mile 20 mental training program. This is a training program I had the worst timing ever and created and released end of 2019. It's a 12-week course. As you can imagine, most people's races or many people's races didn't quite make it because of the pandemic. However, many people still went through it and absolutely loved it. You can go check out, when I mentioned the link, you can go check out some of the reviews. We have very positive reviews, but I kind of put it aside for a few years. It didn't feel right to be pushing this program when we were, trying to survive the pandemic. So now I am excited that we are relaunching this. We're putting it on sale for 1 week only, and I want to tell you a bit about it. The goal of this program is to get you to that moment where the tears stream down your face, where you turn the corner, you see the finish line clock, or you see where you're finishing, and you cannot believe you just did what you did. Because there is nothing worse. Okay, maybe a few things that are worse, but it's a pretty horrible feeling when we have trained so hard and yet our mental side lets us down on race day. And I want to help you get over that hump and get you to the finish line with those happy tears streaming down your face. So the mental training, Mile 20 mental training course is going to help you reach that light bulb moment. It's going to give you the mental training techniques to not only become more confident as a runner, but actually as a person. And we begin with that foundations in building you up as a human being first, because we can't be confident as runners until we take care of our confidence in ourselves. You're also going to learn techniques to handle every race day situation that could be thrown at you. You're going to have specific tactics and tools that will help you handle race day panic, race day stress, things that could go wrong. You're going to learn to understand the signals that your body is giving you during the race, and you'll be told how to handle them. And also how to protect yourself from feelings of failure. Runners can be quite hard on ourselves, and this is going to help you to have a healthy perspective. So this is a 12-week course. Each week we'll have a video for you, some PDF worksheets that you can download and fill in to help really bring home those messages. And friends, for you, for 1 week only, starting on August 8th, this course is going to go on sale by $100 off. That will be $197 instead of the $297. Just for 1 week only. They will then go up to $297 for a week, and then I will shut the doors, because it's really important that we have accountability buddies, that we work together through this training course and can go through it as a community. That is really important to me. So this is only going to be open for 2 weeks. So you can go to tinamuir.com/mental training. That's TINAMUIR.com/mental training to go find out more. Add yourself to the wait list right now, so I guarantee you will get one of those spots for that first week when we relaunch it. Go check it out, tinamuir.com/mental training. So then how do you you mentioned about the people who have reached out to you, and I'm not surprised to hear that at all, that people have reached out. And you have talked about how you had an invasive surgery age 15 and you didn't have a choice. Didn't give your consent to have that. What you can share about that if you want to, or you can just tell us, for anyone listening who maybe this is resonating with them, they have someone who has CAIS. What would you tell that person listening right now, knowing all that you know through these experiences?
Right. So just to cover the surgery, I guess, I was diagnosed with CAIS when I was really little, like a baby, like 1 year old. And only because my mom knew of family members we had that had it, and she knew it can be genetic. So she had a blood test done just to find out if I had it. And so I knew from when I was I can remember the conversation at 8 years old when my parents decided to tell me, you have this condition, it'll be a little different for you, and that I would have to have surgery someday. And I didn't understand why. And I guess to break it down in the most simplest terms, I have XY chromosomes, but because my body won't respond to testosterone or androgen, it automatically converts it into usable estrogen. Without the testosterone, you can't develop male and you can't develop internal reproductive organs. So I developed female externally and internally. I did not have an internal reproductive system. So I don't have ovaries or fallopian tubes or uterus. But I did have testes in my abdomen that were producing the estrogen that was growing me into a young woman. But because they were technically testes, doctors in the early 90s, girls don't have that. Remove them. That's kind of what the mindset was. And when I was 15, they had just scheduled the surgery, and I just grew up knowing you have to have that. But I was never explained why. And so I had the surgery at 15, and I didn't even know why. And I knew my parents, had told me, this is probably a sensitive subject. Let's not tell people at school. But I missed 3 weeks of school to have the surgery. So,
Wow.
We're in high school. People notice when you're gone 3 weeks. And so then I found myself coming up with lies. And then I would exaggerate things to sound hyper feminine. Like I'd exaggerate how good I did at a pageant, or I'd exaggerate how good I did, because I found myself needing validation, like we had talked about earlier, in these aspects, in these areas of my life. And so now when I meet young women who have CAIS or PAIS or any of these conditions, I tell them, the sky's not falling. You're going to be perfectly fine the way you are. And your body, that's like the magic of our bodies, honestly. Like it's really mind-blowing to me that my body said, I can't use any of this testosterone. So you know what? I'm going to convert it so I can use it. And just did that. I had to do nothing. There was no intervention to make me the way I am. I looked like this when I went in for surgery, and I look like it now, except older. And I think that knowing that it'll all be okay would have been cool to know back then. And I also know the benefit it would have had to meet someone else with a condition like mine. Yeah. And since I think I was 32, I went to a conference for people with intersex conditions. And it was a big conference in Chicago, and there were like 200 people there. And it was very surreal sitting in a room with 200 people in a big, huge circle and chairs who all had my condition or one similar, when I had never met anyone with it and in 32 years. So
although the reality is you probably had, right? Just maybe not known.
Yes, the reality, 2% of the population has one. So the reality is I probably did know someone with something similar and didn't even know it. But, meeting them and having them comfortable enough to say, yeah, I have that too. And then having life experiences that they could share, that they understood, was very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Important to me in my mental health. And it wasn't something I knew I needed till I did it. And, I was pushed by some people I met online to go to the conference. And I was always, every year I'd say, no, it's not for me. No. But once I did it and I realized that's what I've been missing, is when I'm hearing the girls on the team or the girls in the pageants talk about things that I can't relate to and I can't chime into, that chipped away a little bit internally at my feeling of worth. Because in my mind, it was, I can't even talk about this because I don't understand what they're even talking about. Like, I've never had a period. I can't relate to any of this. I can't relate. Like, when anyone, any runner can remember this conversation. Anyone who gets weak for a week in cross country, it's, oh, you're anemic. You're anemic. You're a girl. You have a period. And I can remember coaches saying that to me. And I would always be like, I don't think I am. Because there would be no reason for me to be. And then we'd test my blood levels and I was always fine. And I think meeting people like me made me feel normal, which is something I'd always looked for. And so I think, I've been rambling and I'm sorry. If I met someone else, especially an athlete, going through what I went through, I just would want to tell them it's all going to be okay and that you're blessed to just be here and be alive.
Yes, that's so true. Thank you for sharing that. And that wasn't a ramble. That was very important things to say.
Oh, thanks.
It does make me laugh, though, that I have often talked about when I lost my period my sophomore year. So I guess I would have only had a year with you overlapping. But how I would like slink off into the corner when those periods conversations came. But had you and I kind of known that, then we could have been in the corner like oh, I don't have one, so let's talk about something else. But it's funny that we were both there with
that same insecurity.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I know someone else that is mutual to us. Obviously that's to their own to talk about it, but I know they weren't having a period and they came to me because they were like, is that normal? And I remember I was so panic stricken because I was a little older than them. And I was like, I don't know. Because I never had one.
Yeah, I've had that situation happen to me as well. And it's stressful because you say what you should say, but then you're like feel like such a hypocrite because you're like, this is what you should be doing, not that I am. That's hard. I want to, before we move on, ask you about you were saying about that person you looked up to and what they said and how that was really hurtful and obviously affected you for a long time. Now there's a lot of conversation going on about trans athletes, intersex. I don't hear that so much, but trans athletes particularly. And people tend to fall in two camps. I feel like if you've been a competitive athlete, people typically tend to fall in the yes, I agree, it should be black and white. And if people that are in the recreational side who haven't been competitive or at that top level are kind of like, why not let people compete? Obviously, there's the dividers politically as well that come into this. But for me, I always find myself in a weird position because I do see both sides. Yeah. However, I lean more on the inclusivity side. But I would love to hear your thoughts because you obviously were in races where that could have affected you, but you also understand what it's like to, as you said earlier, how people treat people who are different.
Right. I think it's really hard because, like you said, everyone wants it black or white, and it's not a black or white situation. And I know the trans community has different hurdles than the intersex community. And I say that because they are going through bodily changes and hormonal changes that are different than what I was to go through. And I think what's hard is we're asking our intersex athletes to stop their natural production of something, even though they meet the other gender requirements. And I think that's where it's all just such a gray area. And I'm glad I'm not an elite athlete because that is something that I lean toward inclusivity, because I just feel like at the end of the day, like, does a gold medal really matter more than like loving our fellow man and like making people feel included? And I don't know. I just don't feel like in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter, because your talent is still there, whether you got first or second in your hard work.
Yeah. I mean, it is difficult. And I think what gets distorted is how few people, particularly in the trans community, are actually at that competition level.
Yes.
And this is, we're going a bit deep here, but like I see people who are in college or high school, and actually even Steve and I disagree about this, but I personally think, like, is there that much harm in someone participating in a sport when it's literally the thing that is keeping their mental health going, that is keeping them alive, essentially? Right. Isn't that worth it? But yeah, I also see that gray area when it comes to the top, like you said about medals.
I think when we're talking, like you said, like, because if we're talking about two different like areas of running, like, do I think a trans woman running a marathon should be able to register as a female? Absolutely. That does not threaten me at all. I think that's awesome. And like you said, if that's what's saving them and that sport is their mental health, then by all means, I can respect as in an elite level how that decision needs more thought than it would in a recreational level. Like, I can understand why it's not so easy for them to just say, you're right, everyone's included. I can get that. But I also feel like maybe there needs to be a bigger conversation.
For sure. For
a longer period of time.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I want to go on one more thing about, I want to read just a quote you had on one of your posts. I think it was a few months ago. You said, you were talking about, or maybe it was last year, I can't even remember. You were talking about wearing a swimsuit for part of the Mrs. America competition. The swimsuit round is a point of contention for many, but for me, I know the miles this body has ran and the daughter it chases around each night. No one's perfect, so embrace what makes you, you. We've talked about some elements of this, but yeah, Mrs. America, Miss America, any of these pageants are, at the end of the day, going to be judged a lot on body. So how do you keep it so that you do feel, you mentioned about running, so I'd love to hear how that ties in, but how do you keep that confidence in your body knowing that it is being judged in that way?
This is going to sound crazy, and it's hard to explain it to people who don't do pageants. I feel more accepted and strong in a pageant in my body than I do running, if I'm being honest. Runners, and I'm a runner and I love the running community. And I went on after competitive running to coaching. I coached high school level for 7 years. Runners are the most critical people of each other and of themselves. And looking back, I cringe at things I heard our male teammates say to each other about their bodies, because males go through the same body image issues we go through. I cringe when I think about the things I told myself or the things I let my teammates say about themselves based on what they thought they needed to do to accomplish a goal. And you don't hear that in pageants. I don't hear that kind of talk. I meet a lot of other, especially Mrs. Pageantry, you meet a lot of other mothers and a lot of women talking about what their workout regimen is, or if they, also are runners, or, that kind of thing. But we all are so vastly different, tall, short, athletic backgrounds, not athletic backgrounds. Some gained 100 pounds having baby and then they worked really hard to lose it. Others, you're all over the map. And so we're all so different. But while running, it felt like we all had this one common goal, and we were told this box is what a fast runner fits into. And if your body doesn't fit in that box, then you're not going to be fast. And I felt like that was really hammered home my first few years. And I know other young women we ran with who it definitely got to them, and they weren't built like what we think of when we think of a fast runner. And I think that that's something that I hope is changing over time. And I know I've seen the conversation change just at the local level. I've seen local collegiate runners from schools like Aquinas talking more about accepting their body and the changes. But in terms of pageantry, I always felt very strong because when you model in your swimsuit, we'll say on stage, they read a bio you write, and they ask you a few questions to spur it. But that way they have something to say while you're on stage. And I'd always write about running and how I've ran in the last 3 years 4 marathons, and I ran each one for a different organization. I've ran for Purple Community. I've ran for Intersex Youth. I've ran for Kids Food Basket, and I've raised thousands of dollars for those and ran thousands of miles. And I think that's pretty cool that I can stand up here in a swimsuit knowing I did that. And I know I'm by no means the thinnest woman up there or the most muscular, but I think that it's a good way to tie in, look how much our bodies did.
Yes, so true. And I love hearing that. I love that you're smashing what I think I and so many others think. I mean, that really surprises me. I know it probably makes you a little bit that's what people think, but that really surprises me. I almost envision, this is going to sound horrible saying this, but one of those reality TV shows like The Bachelor, where everyone is like, look at my belly, or my arms are too big, and I love hearing that's not what it is.
It isn't to me. I've not witnessed much of that. Of course, there are contestants that are striving to be thin, and it's too much, and it's sad when you see it. You're going to get that in any big group of women, especially competitive women, whether it's a pageant or a sport. You're going to get that. But I felt like it was much more black or white in athletics than it was in pageants, because in pageants it's more, you're finding maybe something that flatters you. You're finding a swimsuit that flatters you. You're also finding a workout regimen or a sport that you enjoy to do to stay in shape for it. And, people have disagreeing thoughts on it, and that's fine. It's just something I enjoy, so I do it. When it comes to athletics, I also felt like it was very black or white. And I mean, I can still remember my sophomore year, which is before you joined the team. And I can't remember if this changed or not. Day one, we all got in line, and coach weighed us in front of all of us and told us what we weighed, and then did our body fat with a little tongs. Yeah. And I remember I was like, this is very embarrassing. I don't want to do this. And at the time I was severely underweight, and I didn't think of myself as being severely underweight, but I can look back now and recognize I was. And I remember some of the girls just panicking because it was humiliating. And it was a way of saying you're not good enough based on a small number this isn't a golf score. It doesn't matter. The lowest number is not going to win you anything. And that's what it was made to feel like.
Wow. I had no idea. I don't remember that happening. I mean, whether I've blacked that out or not, I don't remember that being the case. It might have been
before. My first 2 years in the team were a little different than my second 3, because I was a redshirt, so I had 5 years. And we did change things over time, and it especially changed when Steve took over as our head coach, and we saw a lot of positive changes. But without naming obvious names, I can remember coach giving me a high five because I weighed less than a boy on the team who was 5'1". I'm almost 5'7", to put that into perspective. And you know who I'm talking about. He was very, very, very petite and thin. And it was like a joke, and it was a high five because I weighed less than him. And at the time, I was honored by that. I really had a lot of value in that. But that moment, I was 19. I mean, those things, whether you at the time feel the negative connotation behind it, stick with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've talked a lot about the impetus of what started me down that path of losing weight, losing my period, and then getting caught up in that. And I actually remember you making a comment pretty soon after I lost quite a lot of weight. I remember you saying to me, like, you're so skinny or something. You said something, and I remember it being like, oh, do I? You know, and even though like now I'm like, like, what are you doing? Like that wasn't a compliment.
But it's hard because like at the time we all looked at it as a compliment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that's what we were taught was important. But looking back, so many fast runners are not that skinny. And athletes in general. And it's ridiculous that it got to that point where that's how they were judging your worth. Like I can remember a past coach acting like if you didn't hit this standard of body fat or weight, then you must not have trained all summer. You clearly didn't work this summer. And some of the girls did work hard. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They just are bigger than the average runner. And that's okay. If they're still running good times, who cares?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm glad things are starting to change. They're still not changing fast enough, but thank you for sharing that. Because I mean, that kind of is putting into place some pieces that like gaps that I've had, wondering like, did I exaggerate the situation? Was there stuff going on? But it, you know, as you've said, there were comments being made. And of course that added to the team culture, right? Between us girls. Of course, we were going to kind of see it as competition with, you know, the way that we looked or what we ate when that was being fed in from the start. And not just the generation that you were in, but the generation behind us. Same thing, because they were probably taught the same thing in high school.
And it's all like a chain, and you don't always see how that chain is affected. And it started, you know, day one with the weigh-in telling us, well, don't worry, we'll get now that we're ramping up your miles, those pounds will fall off. Okay, now I have that, I need to lose weight. Then it's, well, what are you eating for lunch every day? Like, let's make sure we're eating healthy proteins. Let's make sure we're eating healthy carbs. And then that snowballs. And, you know, I specifically remember a track meet. This was also my sophomore year before you joined the team. Out of state where there was no options to eat but a pizza place, and everyone panicking because half the girls didn't want to have to eat pizza. Mm-hmm. But the other choice was salad, and you're not going to eat a salad before you race a 10K. That's a bad idea.
Yeah.
And it's like, but that's a snowball. That's part of that chain that in that moment, I remember judging them being like, you're seriously not going to eat dinner? We have to race at 9 a.m. And I'm thinking they're ridiculous. But now looking back at what was being said to them, to put these 20-year-old girls in that mindset that they can't have a slice of pizza because they'd be too fat to run, is ridiculous.
So true. Yes. And I think this is probably going to be quite healing for a lot of people, because as I've interviewed people on this podcast, even dietitians, I've asked them about their background. And at the time, sometimes they say, yeah, I mean, I never really had a negative interaction with food. Everything was good. Right. But then they've come back to me days later and said, you know, I got thinking and I remembered these things came to me and how they did actually make me think about this and how I was wondering about that. So thank you for this, because I think it is really important to talk about and, you know, give that perspective on how it can snowball, as you said.
Yeah. And it's something that I know for me, I have to think of the past and think of what was I feeling. You know, this is also, let me be 100% transparent, 2 years, 3 years of therapy at this point to come to these realizations of this is why you're kind of crazy. But I can now see those moments. And like you said, I would think back, maybe I'm exaggerating this. Maybe I'm just being an a-hole here. Like maybe that wasn't what was intended. But the reality is that is how I took it. Whether it was intended that way or not, it affected how I developed mentally. It affected how I developed physically and what I thought of myself. So whether it was meant to be intended as a negative critique or not, that's how the women were taking it.
Yes, absolutely. God, we got a lot of work to do here especially with our daughters coming up.
I know. It's scary.
To be entering that world not very long.
I know.
Final question I'd love to ask you, with very similar again to me, in that you live a public life, you share your experiences, you're very real with things. How do you keep part of that back for yourself? I find that quite difficult, to not tell people everything and to not forget that, every stranger doesn't need to know everything about me. How do you work through that?
I'm really, really bad at it. I'm kind of an open book, but and I think everyone's different. So it depends on where your comfortability is, where in your marriage, like how comfortable is your husband with you sharing everything, and how comfortable are your children? For me, Jimmy doesn't care. It doesn't bother him at all. I think he likes it. He doesn't mind. And I have found when I talk about things like this and I go on a podcast like with you right now, and we have this in-depth conversation, I find it more therapeutic being honest and open. And then I feel like, there, I said it, it's out. And I feel a little bit better now that I actually said it. I'm not stewing on it. So I don't really keep a lot private at this point. Probably should.
I'm with you there. Other than obviously, I don't really share. I don't have the girls' faces online anywhere. But other than that, and that actually was triggered because Bailey is very much like Steve, who is very introverted, reserved, like private person. And so I was like, he doesn't really like being on the internet in that way. And I thought, well, if she's anything like him and I don't give her this choice,
right,
that could go sour. So that's what started it, but I've managed to keep it so far. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I just was really curious.
Considerably, like I'm on the radio here in West Michigan, and I think I like to think I've done pretty well for myself, but my following is like not even a quarter of what you have on the internet. And I feel like maybe
this is no. We are on the same level, if not you slightly elevated above me in terms of that, I think.
I've seen your Instagram.
No, I am not taking that. You, with the work that you do, the work that you've done, and the fact that you're on the radio, I'm not accepting
Sometimes
that.
I do like post pictures and stuff and then think to myself, maybe that shouldn't be public. Well, you know what I mean? Like I'll post a picture of Greenlee online and then I'll realize the privacy settings public and I'm like, yeah, maybe I should change that. Like I do think sometimes I should be more cognizant of it. Cause like you said, we can't predict if our kids are going to want to use social media or like that when they're older.
Yeah.
But we're not giving them, and this is society in general, we're not giving them a choice at this point.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be the interesting thing about what happens here. But
it is.
Jackie, I adore you. Oh. I am so glad we've had this time. I met you in 2006, 7?
Yes.
So coming up on what would that be? 15 years?
Yeah, almost 15
years. And I've loved watching everything come together for you and seeing the things that you've done and the success you have had, even though that doesn't matter, as I knew at age 20. But where can people go find you if they want to follow along and they've enjoyed getting to know you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I try to share a lot there at the Jackie Green. And, I'm on Facebook too, Jackie Green. You can find me anywhere.
Thank you so much. And what channel are you on for radio if anyone lives in Michigan?
If you're in West Michigan, I'm on 105.3 Hot FM. I host the morning show. So I'm on 6-10 a.m. Monday through Friday.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Keep up the good work. Continue to inspire me and can't wait to chat again.
Yes, you too.
Hi, friends. Just a quick message to say a big thank you to the Running for Real team. While I may be the face of Running for Real and the voice behind the podcast, there are a group of people who are working tirelessly to provide everything that runners could need within our community to make our community stronger, better, and evolve and grow and learn from one another. We are working really hard to make Running for Real the place we believe it can be within our community. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone on our team. That is Victoria, Stacy, Sandy, Sally, Maria, Kelsey, Kat, Jeremy, and Erica. I appreciate each and every one of you and the hard work that you put in. Now let's get back to the show. Well, that definitely went to some places I didn't expect it to go, and quite, just Jackie used the word therapeutic, and that's how it felt for me in some ways, hearing someone else's experience from our collegiate time. Also, having that conversation about how things can snowball, how single comments can make a difference, single actions. So it really gave me things to think about, and I hope it was helpful for you. I've really loved seeing Jackie grow and progress and what has happened, what she's done with her life since we first met back in 2007. And I am excited for you to go follow her along with in the future. So make sure you go check her out on social media. There will be links to her stuff in the show notes, which you can find at runningforreal.com/episode 310. There will also be links to our sponsors in the show notes. Be sure to go check out that mental training course. Goes live in just under a week. And once it goes live, just over a week, on the 8th of August, it will become live. It will be $197 for 1 week only. So make sure you go grab it there. This has been a course that's helped a lot of runners in the space. And I want to make sure you get it. I want to make sure you have accountability buddies to stay with you. So go check that out in the show notes, or you can go to tinamuir.com/mental training. I also want to thank Athletic Greens. You can go to athleticgreens.com/Tina to go get yourself that 1 year free supply of vitamin D, plus some free travel packs. And also go check out Speed City, the podcast, Legacy of Speed, the podcast about Speed City. It is Malcolm Gladwell and Tracksmith and Pushkin's new podcast. It is fantastic. And I am absolutely loving it. I think you will too. Be sure to go check that out. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you on Monday for a Together Run and on Wednesday for Weekly Strides. See you then.